My colleague, the Reverend Tom Owentoole, has written a book entitled Wrestling with God. He's a big fan of alliteration, so he divides all people into three primary theological camps: affirmatism, agnosticism, and atheism. He then says that it's the manifest strength of Unitarian Universalism that within our theological embrace, adherents can honestly assume all three positions, sometimes even at the same time. When the three A's, atheism, agnosticism, and affirmatism, are clasped in resourceful tension, one's religious identity becomes hale and hearty, for each attitude brings a valuable gift to the theological table, providing a system of checks and balances. Now, I kind of wobble between the three camps myself. Whether I identify as an atheist, an agnostic, or an affirmatist depends on the day, the hour, and mostly on who I'm talking to. In pastoral conversations, I do my best to meet people where they are. I try to use the same words, metaphors, and concepts that they use to convey my support, to show them that I'm listening with an open heart, to offer unconditional acceptance. Put me into an intellectual discussion, though, and my inner contrarian takes over. I typically take the position opposite my conversation partner, just because it's no fun if everyone agrees. So let me ask today, how many of you at some point have found yourself in the atheist camp? You don't necessarily have to raise your hand. I don't want to out anyone. But, I just was curious as to the approximate percentage. Now, Tom Owentoole thinks it's most useful to ask atheists, or ask ourselves when we're in that atheist place, about the God we don't believe in, because that leads to common ground. Most often, we don't know, the affirmatists and the agnostics don't believe in that God either. It would be very difficult to find a Unitarian Universalist who believes in the kind of God who created the universe like with a purple crayon. We don't believe in a judgmental or cruel God. For the most part, we struggle with any version of God that looks like Charlton Heston. In fact, one of my favorite theological jokes is about a conservative fundamental preacher who dies and approaches the angel at the gates with so much excitement. "Finally, I get to meet God, who is surely well pleased with me." Says the angel, "You may want to cool your jets a little. God is black, and she's not very happy with you right now." What I worry about, though, is that if we focus on what we don't believe, we run the risk of getting stuck in our faith development. So I've talked before about the stages of faith. James Fowler observed 7 spiritual stages that most people progress through somewhat predictably. As infants, the quality of care we get determines our basic attitude about the universe. Is it a safe and reliable place, or is it life dangerous and unpredictable? As young children, the lines between fantasy and reality are blurry. The spiritual work is to gradually learn to differentiate between what's real and what's imaginary. School-age children soak up tradition like sponges. School-age children tend to believe what we're taught with very little questioning. And that changes when we enter adolescence and young adulthood, as anyone who has raised children to adolescence or adulthood knows. We become more skeptical. We push back against this along with everything else. Most people reject at least some of what they've been taught, and some people reject most of what they had previously thought was true. Now, this is the first stage where people tend to get stuck. And Tom Owentool's question, what God don't you believe in, can contribute to that stuckness. When I read some of the so-called new atheists, like Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, I just get annoyed because I think they're stuck. They give all these arguments against religion and against faith and against God, but what they're really talking about is fundamentalism, and they are so flippin' arrogant. I heard one interview with Richard Dawkins where the interviewer was trying ever so gently to help him see that maybe it wasn't fair to paint all religious people with the same brush. Dawkins went as far as admitting that yes, his objection was to fundamentalist religion, but then he said flat out that he had no interest in dialogue with religious progressives or moderates. I believe the direct quote was, "I think they're fairly harmless, but they have nothing to teach me." I wanted to throw something at the speaker. See, the next spiritual stage, the one that we progress to if we can avoid getting stuck, is an awareness that none of us have a monopoly on the truth. That everyone has things to teach us, and everyone has things to learn from us. We learn to become increasingly comfortable with paradox and uncertainty, increasingly accepting of multiple viewpoints. Our capacity to live in the present expands, and our awareness and acceptance of life in all its fullness grows. If this process continues, we progress to the end stage, which is called universal faith, or sometimes enlightenment. We learn to treat every person with compassion, to see all people as part of a universal community organized according to the principles of love and justice. Skillful atheism, then, mature atheist spirituality, isn't defensive or angry. Mature atheists craft their answers to great spiritual questions without invoking a deity or defaulting to particular mythology. The conversation about what atheists do believe is way more interesting to me and far more productive than rehashing the reasons why fundamentalism or one's childhood faith no longer works. The author of our first reading, André Comte-Sponville, describes atheist spirituality as consisting of fidelity rather than faith, action rather than hope, and love rather than fear. Did you catch that in the reading? So let's parse it a bit. Fidelity rather than faith. This is Comte-Sponville again. Faith is a belief. Fidelity is more like an attachment, a commitment, a gratitude. Faith involves one or several gods. Fidelity involves values, a history, a community. The former calls on imagination or grace, the latter on memory and will. And while faith and fidelity can go hand in hand, for atheists, faith isn't necessary in order to remain faithful to the work that is asked of us in this life, the work of learning and growing in wisdom and skill, the work of creating the beloved community, the work of healing the world. Let's move on to action rather than hope. In the face of challenges, rather than hanging in and relying on a deity to come to the rescue as a reward for having the correct beliefs, atheist spirituality acknowledges that no one's going to come to our rescue, except maybe our fellow humans. So we'd better get off the stick. Here's another joke. Once, during a terrible flood, a devout Christian wound up trapped on his own roof. Some neighbors came by in their canoe and offered to give him a ride. "No," he said, "I'm faithful. God will save me." Next, the local fire department arrived in their motorboat. He again refused to climb in, saying, "God will save me." Then a Coast Guard helicopter arrived and lowered a ladder, but he refused to get on, saying, "You know it, God will save me." The water kept rising, and the man drowned. When he arrived at the gate, he was quite distressed. "How is it that I'm here? I never wavered in my faith." "Sir," the angel said gently, "we sent a canoe, a motorboat, and a helicopter. What more did you expect?" last but not least, Comte-Sponville talks about love rather than fear. Now, fear of hell motivates many Christians to behave in certain ways, believe in certain ways, and vote in certain ways. For atheists, it's love of this world, not fear of what might come after we die, that motivates us to do good and to be good. And this is why love is at the center of our faith. This is why we sing about it every week. Even if some of you are getting sick of it, I don't care. This is why pretty much every sermon I've ever preached comes back to the importance of love. I find that differentiating between love and fear is more helpful than talking about good and evil. I also find that just as, according to Solzhenitsyn, the dividing line between good and evil runs down the center of every human heart, fear and love are at work in each and every one of us all of the time. The task for faithful people is to learn to tell the difference. What are the voices in us? What are the responses, opinions, beliefs, and choices that are loving, grounded in love? And which are the ones that are corrupted by fear? By ego, which is a fear of losing love, by greed, which is a fear of scarcity, or by cruelty, which arises from the fear of suffering in a really complicated way that I probably should do a whole service on at some point. Which leads us to another question. If one doesn't believe in a deity who assigns meaning or purpose to our life, where does our sense of direction, the internal compass, come from? There are two sides to the answer to this question. The first has to do with morality and ethics, and the second with vocation. Now, ethically, the atheists I know are some of the most upstanding people I know. Turns out most of us are less forgiving of our own mistakes and shortcomings than any deity ever imagined. Understanding morality as an evolving human consensus, we constantly hold ourselves to the highest standards available to us. It can be actually kind of exhausting. Many atheists struggle with personal perfectionism and a sort of societal hopelessness, helplessness that grows out of knowing that everything needs to change, but not knowing how to affect that change. I could speak as someone entrenched in American consumer culture. I do my best to reduce, reuse, recycle, shop local, but there are about 1 million things I don't do that I know I should be doing and that I beat myself up for not doing. Sometimes because I'm too lazy, sometimes because I can't find an alternative. When it comes to consumer culture, I feel a little like Heath Ledger's character in Brokeback Mountain. I just can't quit you. But when it comes to morality, atheists try harder, think more, and beat themselves up more than people who believe that all you have to do is choose the right creed and everything will turn out okay. As for vocation, or calling, rather than having an external source, someone calling us, atheists have to locate their sense of who they are and, more importantly, why they are, why we exist. We have to locate that internally. Life is a process of going inward to reflect on our purpose, our sense of meaning, how we can offer our authentic gifts to the world. And then we try, and then we go back and revisit and refine over and over again. Ideally, we become more mindful both of our strengths and of the things that are getting in our way. We come ever closer to living the life that, in Parker Palmer's world, is in us wanting to be lived. But it's an asymptotic journey, right? There's not a right answer for any of us. One question that might come up, how do atheists avoid becoming too self-centered? Through a constant engagement with our beloved community, which offers accountability as well as that sense of belonging that we love so much. No atheist is an island. Always, in one hand is in our integrity, our sense of who we are, and in the other needs to be an openness to others, a willingness to hear all of the ways our actions impact others, and a willingness to change accordingly. And others includes the interdependent web of all life, this poor, endangered planet of ours. Now, thinking about the planet and the interdependent web leads us to the question of how atheists nurture a sense of connection and awe. So, let me ask you, do you need to know all of the details about the artist to appreciate the beauty in a work of art? Nope. Similarly, atheists don't need to reflect on a creator in order to appreciate the beauty and wonder of the creation. Actually, I think the real question isn't how do we nurture a sense of connection and awe, but rather, living in this miraculous, amazing, beautiful world, how can anyone not feel a sense of connection and awe? You know, you zoom in and look at the cellular structure of a leaf, and it's astounding. Zoom out and reflect on the vastness of the universe, the sheer unlikelihood of this particular life, my particular life, arising on this particular planet, circling around a mediocre star in a remote corner of the galaxy. How does that not fill you with awe? If that fails, look at a baby's hand. Look at the curl of someone's ear. Miracles abound, whether we know all of the scientific explanations for them or not. However much we learn about this world, there will always be more to discover. Knowing the how doesn't keep us from wondering at the why and bowing down, absolutely stunned at the wonder of it all in gratitude. And not just gratitude and wonder knock us down. We might ask how atheists handle grief, handle death. When it comes to grief, I'm not sure anybody really handles it. It kind of handles us. The best we can do is hang on for the ride. But rituals do help. And I'll say this, our memorial services, our UU memorial services, which rarely mention God at all, but celebrate the life of the person who's died, those services are way more powerful and healing than anonymous masses or gratuitous sermons on accepting Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Now, I admit it can be comforting to imagine our dearly departed cradled in love or safe in heaven with our ancestors. But here's the truth. No one knows what happens when we die. So atheists make peace with not knowing. They focus on the things we do know. Our lives make a difference. We leave a legacy of love, and that legacy matters. That legacy lasts. So we focus on being kind and good here and now, not because we're hopeful that someday we'll make it through the gates and be rewarded with a white gown and a halo, but just because it's the right thing to do. As for the old saw, there are no atheists in foxholes, the Military Association of Atheists and Freethinkers say differently. It is possible to face the great unknown of death with nothing but courage, determination, and acceptance. Sometimes facing death is easier, though, than facing reality. We are living in uncertain times. We might ask, how do atheists keep hope alive? And this is actually, I think, the hardest question. I can tell you what helps me. Sometimes I take the long view. I look back not 100 years, but 1,000 years. And there's no doubt that as messed up as things are right now, the vast majority of people are better off. The planet isn't better off. However, I watch with admiration and awe Indigenous activists, young activists, and all of you, those of you who are working so hard on climate issues. Current administration aside, I think there's a lot of evidence that things are starting to turn and shift. Not fast enough. There's going to be a lot of needless suffering on the part of not just we human animals, but all of life. But better late than never. And there are natural forces at work here that are beyond our control. Whatever happens in human history, I have no doubt that the planet will survive and that life in some form will find ways to thrive. I also hold on to something that someone said to me a while ago. I can't remember exactly who or when I heard it. She said, "We don't know whether our task right now is to provide hospice care to a dying way of being or to midwife the new way. But we need to remember that either way, the work is the same. Stay present, acknowledge loss, love each other as best we're able, and keep on breathing." The atheists I know best have deep, wide souls, although they might not admit it. When you can't take these big questions, these big unknowable issues, when you can't just move them into a column labeled God, you have no choice but to make space for them in your own spirit, in your own being. It's a brave and challenging path. It's a compassionate and enriching path. It's a path that's valid, and more, it's a path that's valuable. And the best part is, none of us need to walk it alone. So be it, and blessed be.